Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an incredible treat we have today. We've talked to trailblazers. We've talked about people who have gone and shattered glass ceilings. We've never talked to anybody who has literally become limitless and made their own. There is no ceiling for what she and her team have been able to do. Kathy Hildreth is with us, M1 Service. You might have heard her before. Not only is she a West Point grad, so near and dear to my heart, recently ranked as the 49th America's richest self-made women, and that's just in 2022. So, ma'am, thank you so much for coming on the Got Your Six podcast, and stoked to have you here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So as we kind of talked about before the episode started, right, coming from West Point, growing up in aviation with your parents, having this love of flight, and then being able to do what you do with M1 Service, how did you, what do you take away from your time either at West Point or in aviation that you implement pretty much daily throughout your time when you're working or just interacting at M1?
Well, I will tell you first that no one is probably more surprised than me that I would make aviation my career for the rest of my life, if you will. I did grow up in a very flight interested family. My father liked to fly and bought an airplane when I was very young, and forced my mother to go get her pilot's license in the 1970s, which wasn't that common for women to just go out and get a private pilot's license, but he needed a co-pilot, so he made her go get a license as well. So, did spend a little bit of time in my youth flying, and then, after I went to West Point, trying to determine what branch that I wanted to be. I mean, aviation was a perfect fit for me, and I have a love of flying, a love of aviation, and then I furthermore, went into aviation maintenance, that's what carried over into my career in the Army, as well as in my career now in industry, in the defense industry. And so I tell people that I didn't stray too far from what the Army taught me. And so I'm still doing aviation maintenance and a lot of for the Army. The Army's my largest customer. We do all the aircraft maintenance at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where the flight school is. And then the Air Force is my second largest customer. And I do a lot of fighter work, rotary wing work for them as well. So it wasn't something that I even knew existed as far as how big the defense industry was. So after I got out of the Army and learned about the defense industry, I was fortunate to have a bunch of different roles that taught me different things about the business. And then eventually, when I started my own business, I had a very good foundation of where to take that between my technical skills that I learned from the Army and then the business skills that I learned from working for large companies.
When did you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I could continue to learn forever before I start? What really was the antithesis or the jumping off point that you're like, I'm here, I know enough, and we're gonna figure it out as we go?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I worked for several large companies in business development, and for those of you that are familiar with the government space, there's small business requirements that large businesses have to have subcontracts with small businesses in different socioeconomic categories. And then there's also the federal government has small business set-aside contracts. So when I was with the large companies, a lot of smaller companies would approach me to want to do work as a subcontractor. And some of those people that had started companies didn't seem like they had the skill set that I had and the experience that I had. And so I guess my attitude was, well, if those guys can make it, I think I can make it doing this. So I really took that as my pushing off point to say, I can always go back and work for a large company if this doesn't work, but I'm going to go out and try it on my own. And I was I was fortunate. My husband was still on active duty at the time, finishing up his career. So I didn't have to worry about, everything, putting bread on the table, and was able to go take some risks and take some chances, which not everybody has that opportunity. I was fortunate to have that.
Right. And that is true. But being able to just take that opportunity and being upfront with expectations of saying, if this doesn't work out, I can always come back, and that's okay. But at least I don't want to live with not ever trying and seeing what I can do. Talking to everybody else, I'm clearly a little bit above where I think my skill sets are. As you were doing that, how did you continue to bet on yourself throughout that process? Because as an entrepreneur and, growing to what now I think you have 6,500 employees inside the organization, and that starts with one person initially. How did you continue to come back and bet on yourself along the way? Was there a mantra or something that you would go back to?
I think there's a couple of things I'll say as far as being able to look at an opportunity, a business opportunity, and to say, I think I have all the requisite capabilities to do that, and step out and go for something, even when somebody else might say, well, that's kind of risky. You really don't have the qualifications to do that. So, part of it's a little bit of risk taking. Part of it's a little bit of self-confidence to say, well, the worst thing that can happen is, they tell me that, I'm full of it and they won't give me that work. But, to a large degree, trying to look at how things in our government, at least I'm talking about the defense government industry, how they grade things and how they award contracts, and then trying to make yourself as close to those specifications as you can. And, we use little bits of experience as we gain little bits of experience to build on it. So, it's not something like you just go out, you say, I'm going to go do this. You have to build it block by block by block. So you first go out and you have to get your first opportunity, your first job. And we were fortunate to 6 months almost to the day that I left my full-time day job. I got a small subcontract with a large prime doing helicopter flight testing, which is what I did in the Army. It was just 7 people, but those were our first 7 real employees. And we used that to build and to bid more things and more diverse things until the point where we were able to bid some of the largest service contracts that are out there. But it's a process, and it takes time to build that experience, and it takes patience, and it takes really the willingness to do it, unless you want to go acquire another entity, which we didn't. We did it all organically. We grew completely organically. So we started our first year. I was going to mention our first full year in business was 2004, and I did a little over $1 million in revenue. And today I do a little over $2 million in revenue a day.
Do you sometimes just step back and I know you're very grateful for all the work, because you've been able to do it brick by brick along the way. Nothing was really handed to you. You went out and earned everything, you and the team. Do you ever sometimes take a step back and you're like, wow, we're continuing to do it and go and where we want to go, but where we've come in less than 20 years is astonishing.
Well, certainly, again, I'm grateful for the opportunities we have. Our team has worked incredibly hard. We've really focused on performing well. And, you talked about a mantra. One of our other mantras is mission first. That's why the company is called M1 Support Services. It stands for mission first. So we're all about supporting our customers' mission, because we're completely focused on DoD. We don't do any work. We've done some work for some other government agencies, but right now we're focused on DoD. And so, what we do is incredibly important to train pilots for the Air Force, for the Army, to do tests and evaluation on new weapon systems and things that the military doesn't have enough manpower to do internally. And it has to contract that out to industry. But our folks are out there, 75% or more of my workforce are all veterans. So they're very dedicated to the mission and continuing what they did in supporting, their nation both in uniform and out of uniform, or now in a different uniform, if you will. But they really, most of them are really committed to making sure that we support the warfighter, and we do a lot of those things that that the military, frankly, couldn't do without industry.
Right, and having, like you said, that rallying point of mission first, and having such a large veteran population inside of your workforce, that allows everyone to kind of, there's shared understanding across the board right out the gate. And you're able to create a culture of everyone's working together on the same mission, as opposed to trying to go in like 60 different directions. And I'm sure people are doing a lot of different things all at once, just like any military organization is. How do you continue to hone and build that culture?
I think, it's we compare this to almost like a sports team. Everybody wants to be on a winning team. And when you're doing well and you're performing and you're making your customer look good, it has a motivating effect on everybody, and it kind of becomes, contagious. So, I mean, there's always those, that same thing when you're in the military. There's always a 5 or 10% that, they're not going to get with the program. They're there just to pick their paycheck up. But, we have very dedicated people that go out there every day and want to make sure that we're doing things safely, providing a quality product, and ensuring that they can, accomplish their mission. So I think part of that, builds on itself as people get motivated and things go well. We've taken over some contracts from other contractors who don't have our same philosophy, and you can tell after you come in and you spread a little bit of different culture, how different that is. And we've had people come in, evaluators that come in from the government and say, I don't know what you guys are doing. This is the same workforce, but they're more motivated. I don't see people, sitting around, wasting time and those things. I mean, again, you're always going to get that one off, but, in general, once you get that culture inculcated into the workforce and everybody's working towards success, it really is. And it creates its own set of peer pressure on people to step up for those people that aren't willing to step up.
Right, because it's not just you standing on top of the, at the top yelling and screaming, and not that you're doing that at all, but like you're not the one pushing out, hey, mission first and safety. It's the very person at the very bottom of that that's actually turning the wrench, or looking at the individual piece of equipment, that's looking to their battle buddy on the left and right and saying, we got to make sure we're doing this right, because not only are we protecting the warfighter, we are on a team. We are on the best team that there is out there doing what we do, and that is unique, because some people just kind of go out there, go through the motions, and obviously that's why you keep taking over contracts from others who don't have the same rigorous standards that you do. As you're going through, go ahead.
No, I just said that's correct.
Yeah. I'm sure there's times throughout, as you continue to go on, where you look back at your time in the Army, and especially at West Point, were there any lessons learned recently that have kind of come full circle, where you're like, I remember having to do the similar experience, or taking this lesson from when I was a cadet at West Point, or when I was a young lieutenant in the Army, and you're applying it now, in 2022, almost 2023?
Yeah, and I think, one of the biggest things that we learned that you're aware of is, really how to set your priorities, because everything focuses on, you get done what's on your priority list, and those are the things that, become. I have a lot of people recently asked me about balance. I think balance is really tough, especially if you own your own business and you're doing some of those things. So that's why the priorities have to become more important, because you have to focus on the things that are most important. You have to get those done. And, and sometimes those other things that are less important and have less priorities have to go out the window. So, I mean, that's a good lesson learned, from West Point and from the military about doing that piece. And then I think the other piece that I feel is really important, and this is, again, we try to put in our culture, is do your best every day. And it doesn't matter if you're sweeping the floor, if you're doing whatever, you need to kind of, focus on being the best. Even if you're not good at a task, you need to do the best you can. And I think, there's a lot of us that we're in an academic environment, might not have been our best class or our best subject, but if you put your best foot forward and work as hard as you can, you usually can succeed, whether or not you're really good at it or not. But some amount of effort does count. So I think those are two things that I take with me.
Right. And as you look at that, like consistency over time, even if there is a dip along the way, it continues. The trajectory is still a positive growth. As you're looking at, those setbacks, and as you talked about, constantly being on a winning team, how do you rally the team and the culture around when you're at it's not 7-0, it's 0-7. How do you kind of take the team and help them bring them back into the fold in that accountability piece?
Yeah. So, like any business or anything, I mean, there's, ups and downs, peaks and valleys, and, successes and failures. And, I think sometimes, what we try to do is, if we have a failure, and we've had failures, sometimes those turn out to be the best thing, that we didn't get a job or didn't have something happen, because it would have distracted us from where other places that we were trying to go. So, we try to look at it as in that manner. And then we try to take the lessons learned from, why didn't that work, and what should we do differently? And, in some cases it's, is that really a customer that we want to serve? For a lot of different reasons. So it helps us make better decisions going forward, and take those failures or setbacks and push them in a more positive direction by using those for growth and learning purposes.
Now, that when you do the lesson learned, do you more or less do like an AAR after action review like you did in the Army, or do you have like your own kind of thing that you've built inside the team to handle and process lessons learned? What does that look like?
Yeah. So if for example, we bid a job and we don't win, the government gives us a debriefing document that said, this is why you weren't selected. So that gives us a starting point to say, okay, we really didn't understand what they were going for here. Or we really didn't understand our competitors were going to be irrational, which sometimes happens as well. So there's things that go on that lead us to have our own self-examination based on the feedback we get from the customer. In other cases, we're taking a look at, why did we go down a certain path? And, sometimes we deviate from something that's been successful, and that turns out not to be a good solution. And so I think, all of those come into play to take a look at our internal processes, our customers, and what they're looking for. And, there's the customer base that we have is getting younger and less experienced. And what that results in is they become a little more risk averse. And so when people have less experience, they don't want to take a chance on maybe an innovative approach that more seasoned professionals would say, yeah, that looks like a good idea. Let's try that. And that's something that we're working with internally to view it is, take a look at who's evaluating us. And, if it's somebody that's, 3 or 4 years out of college, they have a whole different philosophy and outlook than someone who's been doing it for 30 or 40 years.
And that's also an introspective moment too, because you're able to meet people where they're at and understanding where they're coming from based on their level of experience, their understanding, and then still trying to get everyone across the finish line together, which is extremely hard to do, especially with lots of different stakeholders. Is there something more or less specific that you and the team internally discuss when you're looking at relating to people, when it comes to either experience or just different perspectives to kind of continue to move forward together?
I think, that's one of the things that we wish wasn't so personality dependent. But unfortunately, we deal with a lot of different people, and it becomes personality dependent. So you do have to become, sort of, as you alluding to, sort of almost a psychoanalyst to look at your customer and say, okay, for this customer, I have to do this behavior. And for this customer, I have to do that behavior. But it should be more objective in nature. But what we find is a lot of times it depends on the person that's sitting in the seat. So we do have to customize our approaches sometimes on delivering a specific type of solution based on individual, and then unfortunately those people, just like in the military, those people rotate 2 or 3 years, and then you start over with a new one and have to break them in just like you do when you're in the military with a new commander. So there's a lot of similarities in that fashion too.
And going back to your time in the military and where M1 Service is now, do you have a favorite failure that you go back to over and over again? You're like, I'm so glad I made this mistake, or I learned from this experience, right? Because you're either winning or learning. So do you have a favorite lesson learned from your experience thus far?
Yeah. So I'll give an example. We're a fairly young company. We were maybe 3 or 4 years old, and we had an opportunity to get into more the facilities maintenance side of the government services rather than the aircraft side. And we had a mentor protege program. That's the government allows larger companies to get into a formal relationship with smaller companies and help them along. So we had a company that decided that they wanted to be our mentor and took us along, and it was a large job for us at the time. We didn't win it. And that's one of those ones that we're glad we didn't win it, because if we had gone into the facilities maintenance rather than the aircraft maintenance, would have taken us on a completely different path than where we are now. And frankly, that's a very cutthroat, very, very cutthroat segment of the industry. And I'll just say the type of people that you hire are less likely to be veterans. If you're going to hire somebody that's going to cut the grass, clean the snow, fix the plumbing, that's way less likely to be a veteran than an aircraft mechanic or a logistics specialist or a pilot. And so it really is a different sort of class of employee that takes a lot of different management. And we're fortunate to have the high population of veterans that we do in our workforce.
Yeah. And that's one thing I find absolutely incredible about M1 Services and what you've continued to build is not only are you reaching forward to continue to grow the company, but you have no problem reaching back to veterans and helping pulling everyone forward, after the military, because that transition from talking to friends and others is challenging, because you're reforming and rewiring your identity, and to have an organization like M1 Services for people out there coming out of the aviation field is absolutely incredible. Ma'am, as we wrap up, I want to just kind of close with one question, and we hinted at it earlier, and we talked about finding a way to be better today than yesterday, always looking for a chance to succeed. So today, how did you become better than yesterday?
Well, I guess I'll say that every day try to learn something new. I try to stay on top of what's going on in the world, which is not always something that you want to know sometimes what's going on in the world, but just try to learn something new. And that's another thing that I think has not surprised me, but it's the fact that there are so many new things that I learn on an almost daily basis about business, about people, about different things. And I think that's what you should never stop learning, and always be listening to people and taking in and broadening your skill set. And you'll never find that that's a bad thing to do any of those things.
So what did you learn today?
Oh, what did I learn today?
Yeah.
Today I learned that I need to stay on top of all of my managers, because sometimes they forget to do things. But that's not really a new thing. But that's just something that came up today, where I had expectations. We all make assumptions that people know what to do. Sometimes people don't know what to do, and so we sometimes have to let go of those assumptions and make sure we're steering people in the right direction. So that was my lesson for today: is don't take anything for granted that your managers know what they're supposed to be doing.
And that is a great lesson to continue to just have always in the forefront of your mind. Man, where can people go to learn more about M1 Services and more about what you and all the other philanthropic work that you do, whether it's Wounded Warriors, Flying H Foundation? Where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of stuff really out there online besides the publicly available stuff through Forbes and the other things. There's a little bit of information on our M1 Services website, www.m1services.com. But we're a privately held company, so we don't put a lot of stuff out there in cyberspace. So that actually turns out to be a competitive advantage to us many times as people are trying to figure out what we're doing. And so I shared a lot of that with you today.
And man, we are absolutely incredibly grateful, not only for your methods, your strategies, your tactics, but most importantly, thanks for having our six. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.